Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle Dracula Horror Movie Podcast. On this podcast, we talk about horror movies, vampire movies, and all-around awesomeness. And this week, we continue our comedy horror retrospective with Love at First Bite, starring George Hamilton. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So, warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series and the upcoming game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Out of the Shadows. With me from Los Angeles, special guest Adam Flashko, screenwriter and creative producer for the highly successful Skylanders series, as well as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the viralicious horror action game Prototype 2, and the upcoming Call of Duty Online. Say hello, Adam.
It's Van Helsing. I changed it for professional reasons.
And also in Denver, curiously, with color commentary, host of the mom-oriented podcast Pod Moms, Attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hello,
Hello. Wow, this is the movie that brought back Bela Lugosi impressions. Okay.
Actually, that was my impression of the Count. I can't believe you don't recognize an impression of the Count when you hear one.
Oh, the Count. Okay, we'll have to discuss. We're going to get into this, the source of my Dracula impressions. All right.
Wait a minute, bad? Wait, did you say bad Dracula impressions? Oh.
No. Okay. Love at First Bite is a 1979 comedy horror film directed by Stan Dragati, written by Robert Kaufman, using characters originally created by Bram Stoker. It stars George Hamilton, Susan St. James, Richard Benjamin, and Artie Johnson. The original music score was composed by Charles Bernstein, and it's actually one of three major Dracula releases in 1979, and with this one we have done all of them. And it is the fourth vampire movie from 1979 that we've done on this show. Can anybody here name them? Name the four vampire movies from 1979 that we've done on this show?
I can name them because I'm looking at them, but I want to hear if Adam can name them off the top of his head.
It's not quite fair to make Adam do it.
The ones you've done. So it would have to be Langella Dracula, Badham's Dracula. Are these pure Draculas?
There were three were Draculas, if you include this one, and one is a non-Dracula. Right.
Okay. That's going to be hard to sort of.
You said, and it's not fair to hit Adam with it because he hasn't been on all of the shows.
Right.
So we got Langella Dracula. We got this movie, Love at First Bite. Also in 1979 was Nosferatu. The 1979 version, which actually called him Dracula.
Oh, with Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, with Klaus Kinski, that's right. And then there were actually a couple of movies that I'm unaware of. There's one called Graf Dracula that is European, and I haven't seen it. So that wasn't what I was going to count, but we also did Salem's Lot on this show, and that was also in 1979. So
right, sure, I count.
So that gives us four. That means this is the fourth. That means that 1979 is probably.
And there's another film called Nocturna, which apparently was a horror comedy as well that featured disco dancing and starred an actor with the surname Hamilton. So lots of commonalities with this one.
I mean, I find it strange that there was this weird bumper crop of vampire movies from '79. And one thing that we haven't really gotten into is
what happened in '78.
Well, I think the thing was that Dracula was a big hit on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
So we had Langella doing sort of the gory, the sort of the gory, artistically sort of flavored version of Dracula, very romantic, and it was a hit, in 78, 79, and I think that's what began to fuel it. Where people began to say, oh, this would be, the vampires. Also, there's always the rule of, when there's one kind of picture, there's going to be at least one other, like the dueling meteor pictures, the dueling end of the world pictures, the dueling, you see.
Well, what year was the Louis Jourdan Dracula? That's like 78, right, or something like that. I will find that out right now.
That's like saying, when was the Carradine Dracula?
Well, Carradine. That would have been, in the 40s, of course, but are you talking about John Carradine? John Carradine was Dracula back in the 40s. But when was he on stage? I think that was the 60s. Count Dracula with Louis Jourdan, that was a big deal Dracula. That was 1977. So, and that was fairly popular, but it only would have been on, if you're watching a lot of PBS, you would have seen that. And I have the vaguest memories of that. But it's, anyway, for some reason, for all the reasons you've listed and in theory, more. Oh, there's something else that happens. In 1972, In Search of Dracula, the book, this is the first book that made a big deal out of Vlad Tepes. Is
that right?
Yeah. So that gets released in 1972, and that also causes this sort of resurgence.
Is that the one that who was the guy? Not Redescu. What's the author's name? I think I read this book.
Florescu, and it was Florescu, and I want to say McNally. And they actually did a number of those books. But yeah, the first one was called In Search of Dracula, and it was a big deal book. And in fact, I was reading an essay earlier today by Marv Wolfman, who wrote the Dracula comic book, in the 70s, and he said that the reason they started doing the comic at Marvel had a lot to do with the popularity of that novel, In Search of Dracula, that it brought about. It just gave people a new angle. And it probably also is why in a movie like Love at First Bite, which does not expect you to know jack all about the history of Dracula, that nevertheless they call him Vlad. We started using the name Vlad for.
I was actually impressed by that. I mean, it was this is a film that is definitely a function of its time.
Yeah.
So to kind of go with Vlad, that may have been the first time that I'd really kind of heard that. And this actually may have been, I mean, apart from the Badham Dracula, maybe my first sort of reintroduction to Dracula, weirdly enough, and I think a lot of other people at that same time probably took that same route back into Dracula.
There's one more that I can think of, and that's when right around that time. The McNally book comes out, the Florescu McNally book comes out in 1972, and then Richard Matheson, who just passed away, wrote the script for Dan Curtis's Dracula, which came out in 1973. And that starred Jack Palance. So there's that. But again, not near, if you ask people, hey, are you aware of Love at First Bite? They might be vaguely aware of it, and that's something we should discuss in a sec. If you ask them, hey, are you aware of the Jack Palance Dracula? I think that one really has completely disappeared from people's mind.
Well, also, isn't there like a Denham Elliott one, too, somewhere that I've been sort of dying?
There is a Denham Elliott Dracula. That was also on BBC, and I don't remember the dates. So, maybe while we discuss it, I'll look up. The Denham Elliott Dracula, by the way, is really awesome because he wears those little round blue sunglasses. So
I love those.
Yeah, no, they're very cool. You
mean like Gary Oldman?
Like Gary Oldman, and also actually like Professor Griffin, the TV host from Austin. Right. That's what's so strange is that Professor Griffin in Austin looks like the Denham Elliott Dracula. I'm not sure if he's aware of that or not. I mean, I would kind of have to assume that he is. So
you could ask him.
Who is this?
There is, by the way, it's 1968. I found it. Okay, so there's a host in Austin, Texas, who is on cable, and he's called Professor Griffin, okay? And he does his...
Jason's actually been on his show.
I have been on his show, that's right. He does local events, and he's like the mascot for the Goodwill Halloween stuff, and, because Goodwill sells a lot of Halloween costumes and everything. Anyway, it's called Professor Griffin, and he looks like the Denham Elliott Dracula. And again, I've got to ask him if that's on purpose or not. Who knows? So, yeah. Wow. Good job pulling that one out. I have not thought about the Denham Elliott Dracula in a long time. All right. Now that we've lost the entire audience, let's try to do like a truncated first impressions and then get right into the stuff that we want to talk about in this movie because I'm kind of excited about it. All right. Adam, having watched Love at First Bite, probably for the first time in a couple of years, at least, unless you watch it like regularly or something, give me your first impressions, what you want people to know or want to talk about Love at First Bite.
Right. So, Love at First Bite, like with some of the other pictures, I'm going to say pictures again. I have to look at it just for Julia. I have to look at it from the perspective of when I first saw it, which was kind of when I was a kid, and then now. And I have to say that when it first came out, because there were things like disco and you know and the Dracula was becoming more popular again. And it was just good to see something about Dracula that was sort of more mainstream. You know, I think that this was, and it was very shticky, which was sort of a very popular kind of the comedy thing was on the rise with SNL and whatever. I was very captivated by it when I first saw it, and really liked it a whole lot. What was interesting was in seeing it again, I was just so amazed. It was like looking at, you know, amber, with fossils trapped inside. I was like, oh my God, what were the things like? I was thinking, 70s and early 80s. I got a snapshot that, you know, I didn't think. I'm looking at it through, you know, eyes of, 2013, and there's a lot of stuff in there. A lot of really crazy racial stuff. A lot of, 70s stuff. Not just fashions and hairstyles and drug use and drug humor and whatever for the time, but it was just like all this stuff that, was, I think, very funny at the time for people. That's why I found it funny at the time. But it's just weird how it falls flat now. So as satisfying as it was then, if you were to see it fresh out of the gate, I don't think it would play nearly as well. But so it's one of those things that I think I like Once Upon a Time, and still kind of quotable in some ways. But and now to look at it, it's one of those things that you might be better off just remembering it, maybe how you saw it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really hold up in my mind.
Well, it's sure as heck no Young Frankenstein. I mean, I think that's
true. I think that's one of the things that holds up remarkably well and is a classic. And this is fine. I wouldn't say it's forgettable. I think it's great for its time, or it's really good for its time. But I think that you're not going to pull this out in rotation. And
no.
And now it's Sunday morning. It's time for Love at First Bite. You probably won't do that.
No, that's right. Julia,
I'm curious what vampire movies you do watch on Sunday morning.
All the other Devin Elliott's Dracula.
Lust for a Vampire.
Well, everybody else goes to church and you turn on the vampire movies.
Anything with Ingrid Pitt really will be fine. Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, you go.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, I remember seeing this movie with my dad because my dad is a big horror fan. So I actually had my first. I didn't watch a whole bunch of the horror movies, but the ones I did see was because Dad, always wants a movie date, and my mom hates to watch horror movies. Anyway, so I saw this because, of course, it was mildly horror. I mean, not barely. And but it was when I was young, and so I don't remember very much about it at all, except just seeing it. And I don't think it holds up. I think that it was inspired by Young Frankenstein. It was the whole horror comedy thing was kind of inspired by Young Frankenstein, and then because we watched Young Frankenstein last week, I realized how very much it suffers by comparison, because it's just not nearly as funny. I mean, and it's true that it has all this kind of offensive stuff about the inner city and racial tension and everything, and I don't know. So a lot of that, and then just the jokes they kind of fall flat. So, and I'm thinking about like movies like Airplane, and how you could just, you still quote jokes from that movie, years and years later, and Young Frankenstein, and so it's just nothing like that. It's not particularly memorable in that way, but it's got its moments of amusement and enjoyability.
I've got to mention really quickly that the John Carradine Dracula that you were reaching for, Adam, that was in 1956, and that makes sense because if you think of Carradine being in the Universal pictures as Dracula, that's the 40s. So 56, he's still young enough that he could do that. So that was another TV version of Dracula.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I've seen a bit of that. I just didn't know what it was.
I'm dying to dig that up. I'm sure it's on YouTube. So, all right. I saw this movie, Love at First Bite, 1979, I saw this at the Chateau Theater in Irving with my mom. So this was April 1979, which means this is before the Langella Dracula. I sure as heck didn't see Langella Dracula in the movie theaters. But I saw this. I remember there was a time when my mom and I were going to a lot of movies because she took me to see this, and I also saw The Frisco Kid, which is the movie with...
Oh, my God, The Frisco Kid, with Harrison Ford and Gene Wilder.
Yes, Harrison Ford and Gene Wilder. That's a movie that I don't think anybody has mentioned, like, in the last year, you know.
Wow.
But yeah, so now I got to go dig that up as well. But I remember distinctly seeing it. I remember seeing this in the movie theater. I hadn't seen it since, you know, it was in rotation on HBO, and then I caught it at a Dracula convention a few years ago, and I remember suddenly, having not seen it since, you know, back in the day, being suddenly aware of just how 1970s it is. All this humor, boy, especially the racial humor. The race stuff, we'll get specifically into that, but it is so marked by the time, and I literally don't know what to make of it today. I don't know if it's, you know, if it's trapped in amber, or if it's offensive. I don't know what to make of it. And you know, there's other stuff that really only resonates from the perspective of the 1970s. There's a lot of like you know, Jews in New York humor. There's a lot of references to the blackout and like how crazy people go during the blackout, because that was a big deal. And that was like something that really left a mark on pop culture, because remember King Kong, the Dino De Laurentiis thing, they had a whole monologue about the madness of the blackout and stuff. So just the nature of living in New York City in 1979 is marked by this whole picture. Anyway, so I'm really glad we're talking about it, because I have to say, having done this show now for nearly 2 years, this is a movie I've been looking forward to doing from day one. I'm not saying it's a movie that we would like or anything like that, but I kind of feel like this is one that definitely needed to be discussed.
Right.
You know, because I feel like it's kind of important, and I can't quite put my finger on why. So
I tend to agree with you. And by the way, I like this film a lot, particularly when you compare it to other send-ups, other spoofs, including things like other spoofs of Dracula, basically, like the Vampire in Brooklyn. You know, I do like this picture more than any of it. It has some really classic bits. You know, it's the first time that I remember, someone using the joke, right, of the Star of David instead of the cross. And of course, it has to be Richard Benjamin, and he does it, and it's like, and he does it, pretty well. You know, there's a lot of that stuff in it. It's schmaltzy, sticky stuff, but some of the bits actually still work. Dracula, gets up in the middle of a black gospel funeral. You know, this is all the stage pieces.
With Mr. Jefferson as the Sherman Hemsley.
Totally. I mean, that stuff all kind of works. And what's interesting is you've got Susan St. James, who I think was, in the 70s, was really high up there after Columbo, Macmillan and Weiss and all that other stuff. She was kind of very high up there, and these were good actors. You still had Artie Johnson, who was working after Laughing and whatever else. And George Hamilton, who was not. he was a powerful guy in Hollywood as an actor, and he was.
He does Zorro the Gay Blade around the same time too.
Is that so? When was Zorro the Gay Blade? I don't. It's like 81 or 82, right? I think
it's a little bit later. Yeah,
it says first of two late 70s, early 80s spoofs starring Joe. So he must have done that one in the early 80s then.
81.
By the way, I really like that picture. I really like Zorro the Gay Blade.
I do too.
But a lot of those bits all kind of work. It has a lot fewer of the kind of the gags.
Yeah.
That this has a lot of then Sunday this should be what you're eating. It's like the bits. It's like the little bits that get done. Kind of throwaway bits. The other one is a much broad, a much tighter picture, much more sweeping. It's kind of something else.
Well, and yet, this is a much cleaner picture. I mean, in terms of this is not gag, and that's one thing that I really like. Even though you're right, there are a lot of throwaway gags that the movie slows down to do, and you go, oh, why are we doing this? But not that many. I mean, truly, it holds. I mean, if you look at some other shticky, spoofy movies, like, I don't know, like old Dracula with David Niven, which admittedly I haven't seen since probably the 70s, or The Vampire Happening, which was a horror spoof from the 60s. This is just light years ahead of those. You know, this is really, at least it has a plot. You know,
it's actually good, but I mean, it's good for 1979.
Yeah.
I'm curious what I would be curious to see, and I should have researched this beforehand. I just not thought of it. I would be curious to see what like women's studies type of folks have to say about it, because of the whole sexual mores thing, where she's just like, you know, I mean, she's just very sexually.
So let's recap really quickly, and then you can explain what's up with Susan St. James.
Uh-huh.
So here's my attempt at a 45-second to a minute-long version of what's going on here. We open up with Dracula. Dracula gets kicked out of his castle because he's living in communist Russia now, and they want his castle for Nadia Comaneci to practice for the Olympics. Not making this up. And so Dracula has to take his money and head to New York City, because New York is where he wants to go anyway, because he believes that Susan St. James, a cover model on basically a cosmopolitan kind of magazine, is the reincarnation of his endless love. And so he gets to New York and he immediately starts courting her, and his rival is a descendant of the original Van Helsing who fought Dracula in London. And the rest of the movie just spills out as they just sort of vie for the
But the
attention.
rival starts out as just this really corny shrink that the shrink for Susan St. James, who she used to date.
Right. So now let's get into that. Yes. So right. Dracula's rival is Richard Benjamin, and Richard Benjamin is Susan St. James's psychiatrist, and they have this. Okay, now here's your women's study stuff. They have this really curious relationship where Susan St. James is a supermodel, and her boyfriend / whatever is also her therapist, and she is very open about the fact that she sleeps with a lot of other men.
Well, he's not her boyfriend. He's like one of the people she slept with. But I mean, she's definitely got a theory that of the sexually liberated attitude. You know,
that's true.
Where she just thinks that men are toys. But I can't help, as with the kind of the studying that I've done, I can't help but wonder if she wasn't like sexually abused as a child or something, because she's just so screwed up with her attitude about her body and like how she should be treated. You know, I mean, I don't know, but that's just I come from a completely different time and culture than the people watching this movie as adults do. You know. And so it could be that they were like, no, that's actually how a lot of people were at her age were thinking at that time, you know, and I'm just thinking.
Give me more. I mean, are you talking about the fact that she doesn't
seem to respect her body at all. She seems to think of it as just something to be used in order to achieve goals or whatever.
Well,
and
yeah.
So,
I mean, she doesn't want to be hurt, that's for sure. I mean, she's like, hey, I don't expect you to call, blah, blah, blah.
I know.
And
so to me, that's not.
But is that stuff at the time, not today?
Yeah.
But was that the thinking? That was sort of like the liberated woman was basically, look, I can act like a man of the time. Which
well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I was saying I wish I'd gone back and read some like Gloria Steinem.
But it might not even say that she was abused or anything else. Look, she's going to get what she wants, and she's going to do what she needs to get, like, not pay for therapy lessons or not pay for therapy.
Right.
By sleeping with the therapist, because she's using that as a tool. We'd say now that she probably had a very screwed up childhood, but I mean, that's just been, she's in a world of superficiality because she's a supermodel in the 70s. She hangs out and that's where you have to be part of a club. She already, by the bits that we're hearing, she's already got the theory that she's not going to hang out with anyone. You're not going to have a meaningful relationship with anyone, but just sleep with them once and kind of move on, which is a
adios muchachos, as she says.
Yeah,
very,
it seems very, very 70s, doesn't it? I mean,
it's a well-known version of the 70s more.
Yeah. Well, and think about, I keep thinking about the fact that, okay, this is 79, so if you look at, like, 1961, the mores of, like, say, Lover Come Back, with Doris Day and Rock Hudson. So that's, that's less than 20 years beforehand, and that's a universe
Oh, yeah, but this
where...
is completely different.
No, it is, but this is mainstream. So we're talking about, look how far the mainstream has come between 61 and 79, where, in 61, the whole shtick was that if Doris Day, if people were to perceive that Doris Day accidentally fell asleep and spent all night at Rock Hudson's apartment, it would ruin her career. And that's not even the same universe. Now, I'm surprised that nobody's doing cocaine. I saw no cocaine in this entire movie. I saw she has pot. Susan St. James smokes pot, offers some to Dracula. Drac's not into it. But
you're not seeing cocaine and supermodels until, like, what, Looker?
The 80s.
Man, I forgot about. Boy, I haven't thought about Looker in a long time.
That's an 80s thing.
I guess so. I guess it would have to be. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about pot. It seems in this particular lewds and pot. That's where the drug humor seems to kind of go. Everyone's trying to be,
Yeah.
hip and
Well,
with
what was the nature of the drug humor on Saturday Night Live? Because Saturday Night Live started in 1975. So when this movie came out, they were still in cast one. They were still in the original classic cast of SNL. And that set the stage with some drug humor, but I don't remember what kind of drug humor they actually used. I don't know what they were making reference to. Pot, I think that's it. I don't remember any reference to coke. I remember John Belushi himself had a heroin problem, but they never ever would have made reference to that. Anyway, let's see. So we were going to actually talk about how does this, that sort of leads us to this. This movie comes out in 1979. It is so stamped with 1979. Does it hold up? I mean, is it possible at all to watch this movie as anything other than a curio, of the time? Like, is it if we weren't watching a show about it, or if we weren't doing a show where we discuss it, is there any reason why we or somebody would watch this movie?
Well, I mean, it's definitely an interesting portrait of the era. Just like Saturday Night Fever or whatever, you kind of get this flavor. And by the way, I just want to say as an aside that the disco scene is so funny, but it's just so sad that in this, I don't know what version you watched, Adam, but we watched this DVD one, and they took out the original music, which is I Love the Nightlife by Alicia Bridges.
Right. That's the one I saw, and they did take that out. You're right.
Yeah, and so it's so sad because we watched it on YouTube just to remember what that was like, and it's so much better with that song than with whatever music they did. I mean, the music was fine, but anyway, that disco scene is so funny because all of a sudden they're at this really bizarre club where people there's painted naked people, and it seems to be kind of a mix of a gay club and a straight club. I don't know. Anyway, but it's a disco, and then all of a sudden when the two of them start dancing, it's suddenly more like the Dirty Dancing style of where the country club, where they have a clear dance floor and they do performances. It's like everyone's sitting in chairs, watching on the side. This couple do this dramatic dance, and there's even a stage at one point. It's so funny. But anyway, so things like that where you have the fashions and the music and the the kind of we talked about, the strange way that racial relations are portrayed and sexual mores are portrayed. That's all I think really interesting. And
maybe it's worth watching for that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
First of all, Susan St. James's clothing. Well, let me just mention it, and then I want to do the racial stuff. But Susan St. James's outfits are so cool. Mm-hmm. I mean, they've. First of all, Oscar de la Renta did Susan St. James's outfits for this movie, and she looks gorgeous. If you saw Susan St. James all those years on Kate and Alley, what was it?
Kate and Lacey.
No, not
Kate and Alley. Kate and Alley. You're right, Kate and Alley, yeah.
Kate and Alley. If you watched her all those years on Kate and Alley, you would never, ever imagine that this is what she looked like. She looks like like a real honest-to-God supermodel. You know, she's there with those giant Afghan dogs taking, her photographs, and you know, her clothes look so much like something out of a Charlie commercial, you know, circa like 81
Wow.
or so. You know, doesn't she? I mean, you really want to hear like Mel Torme, you know, singing in the back. It's just so cool. So that's cool. And then, you know, the racial stuff is fascinating because it's like going back and watching, you know, TV from this period where, you know, the way people discuss race is totally different. Just for the listener, if they don't remember and they haven't gone back and watched this movie. So the thing is, Dracula winds up in Harlem because his coffins get mixed up. 2 coffins coming back from overseas via TWA. And so, huh? What's that?
It happens. It can happen.
Yeah, it can happen. Yeah. So
yeah, the TWA product placement was really heavy.
Oh my God, yes, and I wonder if they really had that much leg room on a TWA flight.
Probably.
In '79, I have no idea. You know. Anyway, the black guy.
I still remember people smoking on flights.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I smoked all the way to England one time. And,
nice.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Were they watching Ben on the in-flight movie?
Were they watching what? Yes,
Ben.
they were. Yes, it was Ben. Yeah. It was, and I loved on the way back they said they were going to watch In Cold Blood.
Right.
Yes, Artie Johnson plays Renfield. He's the one who's responsible for getting Dracula's coffin to New York and doing all.
So where was he supposed to be going? He was supposed to be going to New York, just not to Harlem.
Right. Dracula's coffin's supposed to go with Artie Johnson to the Plaza Hotel.
Right.
The other guy's coffin's supposed to go to his funeral in Harlem, and they get mixed up. So Dracula winds up in Harlem, and he wakes up inside of a black funeral, which we spend a little bit of time with. And
right after Mr. Jefferson makes this big point about how you don't come back from the dead.
You ain't never coming back. And there's all this sort of broad, you know, this just broad urban language, you know, and all this call and response. And then Dracula gets out in the middle of a black church, and everybody runs. And then Dracula goes out on the street, and he asks this black gang of youths, you know, where he can get a cab or whatever it is, and they say the police, you know, people don't come down here, and then they call him a honky and they attack him.
They're also doing they're either Nipsey Russell lines or Muhammad Ali lines. Again, it's very much a function of the late 70s.
Jeez. Yeah,
you know,
I can't. It just layers so much crap. No disrespect, but I mean seriously, it's just I mean they're when they're attacking him, they're saying rhymes about how the Muhammad Ali-esque, and Dracula pulls out some superpowers and makes one of their switchblades melt, and he has telekinesis, so he tosses a guy through a window, who then, by the way...
At which point he listens to TV.
Who steals a TV. I mean, I cannot believe that the Jeffersons, that Sherman Helmsley and... What was the other lady's name? Isabel Gordon?
Sanford.
Oh, yeah, Sanford. That they actually... I don't know. I mean, it seems to me you'd find this stuff really offensive. But seriously, what do I know? This is a long time ago, this movie is, so... Anyway, Dracula has this whole subplot where he makes his way through the inner city until he gets back to the Plaza Hotel.
Well, and then there's the other similar subplot when he's flying around as a bat and he flies into a window of a black family and they're like, "It's a black chicken."
Yeah.
Oh, it's a Mexican family, yeah.
No, it was a black family. That said it was a black chicken. He's got different families that he goes.
There's these, but they're super poor, and they're just wishing that somebody will send them some food, and then the bat comes in, and so they try to get the food to eat. I mean,
it was pretty horrible.
There's really, I can only imagine from watching this that there's so much segregation in the movies that there's just this idea that the only people watching this movie are going to be middle-class white people. That's the only...
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the Jeffersons are in it, then presumably people are going to come see it just because they're in it. So,
I don't
think so. I think it's just that was just how... I mean, heck, if you watch, comedies now that are aimed at the African American community. They make fun of themselves more than, So I think that, I don't know. I am not going to venture to guess whether it was offensive to them or not.
Well, Spike Lee has complained, actually, that a lot of black comedies have this sort of loose kind of humor that you'd find in stuff like this, and he's like, this is not what we need to be doing.
Right.
Anyway.
Same thing, Bill Cosby's always said the same thing,
Yeah, I mean, but it reminds me also of a lot of humor that you'd see in Mad Magazine at the time, where about this whole concept of New York City as being a tough place with all these different ethnicities that were all kind of vaguely threatening if you weren't part of that particular ethnicity, and it's so alien now, because if you go to New York City today, it is not, New York has changed so completely since 1979, it is not, I mean, wouldn't you agree, Adam, that it's, New York
it's not the same place. It's actually and I hear New Yorkers say it all the time. It really has been cleaned up, significantly.
Oh yeah, Times Square doesn't look like it looked. Hell's Kitchen is now basically all is all artisanal pizzas and stuff like that. I mean, everything is the sort of truly grungy New York that this movie presents, and that things like Death Wish, presents.
Wow, yeah.
It's just a piece of the past, It's just not there anymore. And it's funny how you could create that New York suggestively because everybody had so internalized that vision. So you got the wino sitting on the corner. Well, this wino is clearly on a back lot. It's not like that's a real corner. But you really have this notion that, oh yeah, New York. There's winos and black gangs and people looting and all that stuff.
Well, look at it was in New York, but I mean, I think it's true also in other pictures. Like you look at Rocky and you go, oh, guys warming their hands by the flaming bells. Mm-hmm. On the corner, like where are those flaming bells exactly?
They used to have that in Miami Vice in the mid-'80s. The gangsters would get out of jail and they'd have their meetups in the street with the flaming barrels and everything. I'm like, where is this post-apocalyptic city? I lived in suburban Houston at the time. It's the most boring place on the planet.
I'm sure there were flaming barrels in suburban Houston. I mean, in inner city Houston too.
If I set them on fire, that's the only way it could actually happen.
No, but I mean, if you had if you portrayed inner city Houston,
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And look, not to diminish the challenges of the inner city. I mean, it's truly poverty is still bad. People are still food insecure. Those things are still
right.
Okay, George Hamilton. We should mention George Hamilton because Adam, you mentioned that he was kind of a big deal, and George Hamilton at the time was a massive star. He had been in. I know George Hamilton from this movie, Zorro the Gay Blade, and Where the Boys Are. And Where the Boys Are, he was like this playboy who owned a yacht, and I don't remember. That was actually a movie that had Paula Prentice, which is the wife of.
Wow, I forgot about
Richard Benjamin.
Yeah, of Richard Benjamin, who's the star here. Anyway, George Hamilton was chiefly known for being gorgeous, and he's just a really good-looking guy, and he never played against type. He played Evel Knievel in a biography that I saw, but he did a lot of these. I saw Happy Hooker Goes to Washington, where he played her lobbyist attorney, and the shtick there was that everybody all the women in the city sort of walk into walls and poles as he goes by because.
Is that Javier Hollander picture?
Yeah, but it stars Joy Heatherton as Javier Hollander. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah, I think the picture there. Okay, picture.
Anyway, yeah, fantastic picture. That was truly terrible. But
I was actually going to say. I was thinking I'm not going to say it, but that's not a picture.
But the thing is, actually, at the time there was this whole thing going on where people like Ray Walston and like big deal actors, would show up in these sort of shticky sex comedies.
Oh, wait, Ray Walston was in Silver Streak. And
right.
Ray Walston is no Oscar. Well, maybe he did. I shouldn't say that, but I don't think he's an Oscar-winning actor. I mean, he's a comedian.
That's a good question. My point is that that there was a period in the 70s and 80s where you had a lot of these sticky sex comedies that had major actors in them. You know,
it's a studio picture. I mean, this is something that I think. I mean, even looking at advertising at the time, this picture was advertised. I mean,
you're talking about Love at First Sight or Happy Over Goes to Washington?
Love at First Sight was actually advertised. It got TV airplay. I mean, it got. It was. They were pushing the disco aspect of it. I mean, this was. They brought.
This is a major picture. Yes. It was a huge hit.
It was safe.
Yeah. So let's see. We've got George Hamilton. He is doing Dracula, and I think this Dracula is probably really important in my own memory. But George Hamilton is doing Dracula. He's wearing the tuxedo. He's got a Bela Lugosi.
And I will take issue with the fact that he says at one point that he's tired of wearing the jacket and all the time. And I'm like, well, stop wearing it. Why does he have to if he doesn't want to anymore?
That's definitely a bit. You know, he wants to wear a sports jacket. You know, he wants to wear a turtleneck. These are words that are funny to say, like turtleneck and sports jacket. Sports coat.
Yeah.
Funny words.
But I was like so troubled by the whole thing that I'm like, why don't you just do it? Be who you want to be, dude. You live it yourself.
Right. You couldn't get past the literal meaning of the words for what is essentially just a comedy routine about Dracula.
It just bothered me because I was like,
this is also the first time you've seen Dracula in his underwear.
Yes, that's right. He's got that A shirt and he's got little polka dot shorts. It's funny because and he's got that. Basically, he's wearing the dinner suit and everything is because of Bela Lugosi, and he's even doing the Bela Lugosi accent. He is. He's completely doing a remarkably good. I mean, he does a remarkably good Lugosi, and Lugosi. I mean, you guys will know better than many. You know, was sort of a heartthrob. When Dracula was released, he was a Hungarian, awesome, handsome. Women would faint in the audience when they would see him. He was so striking. And Hamilton, it's interesting. You fast forward a number of years. Hamilton was largely known for. I mean, he was a star. I don't know if he was an actor exactly at the time he was, but he was really a star. And he was a star because I think you said it earlier, Jason. He was so damn handsome. And he he was now, years later, it was sort of like he's the most tan person we'd ever seen. But
I'm wondering something. Do you think that women have physically changed and that we don't faint anymore at the sight of men? Or do they still faint at rock concerts? I don't know. I always wonder, I'm like, I met an actor that I was completely gaga over, and I didn't faint. I don't know if anyone who fainted.
I think the thing is you're not wearing tight-fitting clothes.
That could be it. It could be the corset.
Well, I'm curious, right? It's like whatever you're wearing, you're in a crowd. You're watching the Beatles. Yeah, you're gonna get overheated. You can't catch your breath. You pass out when you're screaming your ass off. If it was when it was younger. I mean, many of us, well, none of us here were born. Not long ago, when people were watching movies and women were fainting, I think they were just they were stifled. They were wearing different clothes, and they just they couldn't catch their breath.
Well, first of all, it's shtick. I mean, to be sure, it's just shtick. But
I think we've seen.
Women would faint around Paul McCartney.
That's what I was going to say. We've seen footage of women at the Beatles just dropping like flies.
Yeah. Well, they get overheated. They're getting hyperventilated and just all that. I mean, it's
right.
Yeah. Why do you ask? Are you?
No, he just said that about how women would faint when they'd see Bela Lugosi, and it just made me think.
Well, that's actually that's what Drop Dead Gorgeous means. Is that it's a person who makes you faint. So George Hamilton is a wonderful choice here. Wonderful idea of him coming to sexually liberated New York and sweeping a woman off her feet with his sort of. He becomes the romantic one, which is funny because this is Dracula Dracula the predator who's always going to get what he wants and so forth. Except for that in New York, and he actually makes reference to this. He's the most genteel. You know, he's sort of the most serious. He wants Susan St. James.
Out of touch, you know. Also, he's a little bit out of touch. He's very old fashioned. He's romantic. You know, what these reeds could do. You know, he's Renfield. Yeah. He's not fitting in. He's not, you know, he's not doing a Jerry Dandridge.
Right. And he actually has a thing where he gets upset. He gets, you know, he feels as though he's out of touch and he's not going to be able to make it. And then they have the reversal where Artie Johnson says, no, get back out there. And we should talk about Artie Johnson. So Artie Johnson, I only know from this and
Laughing.
well, yeah, but it's not like I watched a lot of Laughing. You know, I remember people doing more Artie Johnson impressions than seeing actual Artie Johnson myself. You know, because if people don't know, Artie Johnson, in the first episode of The Office, the American program The Office, Steve Carell does an Artie Johnson impression where he gets behind a tree and says, you know, very interesting but stupid, which is...
Oh, wow, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. And it's just cringe-inducing, right? That's Artie Johnson. That's his shtick. And, you know, I know him. He's wonderful, though. I mean, you know, only he could really do this role.
Yeah, he really is. And he actually did well, when you look at wasn't it Colin Clive who played Renfield in Dracula with Lugosi?
In Dracula, it was Dwight Frye.
That's right. It was Dwight Frye. That's right. But he could, you know,
oh, God.
You know, it really is an Artie Johnson thing. And frankly, as I said, this sort of reintroduced me to Dracula, to like more serious Dracula.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, hearing this Renfield kind of opened the door to kind of what it was, you know, spoofing.
No, I mean, I had never seen Dracula. I saw this. This may very well be the first Dracula movie I ever saw. You know,
I think that's what makes it important.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that makes it important.
Yeah, because if Dracula comes out in 1931, this is a major release from a major studio coming at everybody and bringing together all of these various things that they might remember about Dracula from various places and putting it all in one movie, a comedy, but nevertheless it sort of cements all this stuff that, you know, like Renfield and the castle and the tuxedo and the bats and things like that. We should mention Richard Benjamin. We were talking about Richard Benjamin, and before, you know, we mentioned that he's actually the spouse of Paula Prentice, who was the tall girl in Where the Boys Are. But Richard Benjamin is funny as heck. He's really good as Rosenberg. He has all the best lines. Every good line in the movie, every funny line comes out of Richard Benjamin's mouth. He's a really, you know, he's a great comic actor. You know, he has this wonderful way of saying all of his lines in just sort of a casual, aside way. Even the manic stuff that he's doing seems just very intelligent. I really like this actor, you know, and Richard Benjamin I know from Saturday the 14th, which is another horror spoof, which is not a very good movie. But
I just saw him like a couple weeks ago in Catch-22, and I was saying that he's in it with Anthony Perkins, but they're so similar, the two of them, and I mean they're different, but they're very similar in that they're so quirky. You know, they're handsome but very quirky. And I think Richard Benjamin, because he is handsome, but he's handsome in a really cartoonish kind of odd way. Yeah.
No, I mean you can imagine why he fits so well with Paula Prentice, who is very beautiful, but also just very unusual in her own light. You know, she's very tall. She has that sort of husky Houston accent, and you know, it's just what an oddball pair they were, I guess, or are. I mean, I think they're still married, in fact. We should maybe do Saturday the 14th. I think that would be painful as heck, because you want to talk about a movie with way too many gags and a lot of them fall flat. Saturday the 14th.
Yeah, that's. I vaguely remember this, but you know, I know Richard Benjamin's kind of like from Saturday Night Live. He was sort of in that sort of New York smart comedian circle with Buck Henry and people like that. and he became a director. I think he directed pictures like My Favorite Year. I think you might have to look.
Yes.
But
That's right. He did direct My Favorite Year. No, you're right. I forgot about that. No, go ahead.
Like that. I mean, he really became, and then that was actually, that's a really good movie. I like that movie a lot. But I mean, he started doing that kind of comedy as well. So I mean, that's sort of where
he was in. He was in Clark, which is a TV series. I never saw Clark.
That was a great stand-up of, because people were doing Star Trek parodies, I think, at the time, too. Probably because of the continued popularity of the first TV series, but then also the talk of, a motion picture and kind of whatever else kind of endlessly. And Star Trek conventions becoming popular. But, yeah, I remember seeing Quark, and it was, you look back on, on that kind of thing now, and you can see where it's being done smartly and kind of in a fun way through Modernize and something like Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
But then you look at 1970s TV, primetime TV with sort of a sci-fi send-up. And, actually at the time it was surprisingly, it didn't all work, but, those was also during the time of the Van Pattens, like Dick Van Patten was doing stuff. They were doing a spoof, a Robin Hood spoof called When Things Were Rotten, which was a Mel Brooks thing.
Yeah.
And that may have preceded it a little bit, but it was right around the same time that these kind of things, there was sort of an appetite for this kind of thing. And
you're right. Sort of shticky send-ups of comedy. Hey, I got one more for you. Jack Elam in a short-lived sitcom takeoff of Frankenstein. Can you name this? Is this familiar to you at all?
I remember Jack Elam. He did a short-lived. Was it other on TV?
It was on TV. He played the Frankenstein monster. It was called Struck by Lightning, and
I have not seen that. I'll tell you that right now.
I don't even know if you're going to find it on YouTube. But yes, and there was also around this period, I know there was a Dracula thing that starred, one of these many, just actors that you saw in a lot of comedies at the time. I mean, I think it was actually an actor we saw. It was like Robbins or one of those guys from Woody Allen. Anyway, I know there was a Dracula sitcom. But you were exactly right. There was this whole thing like, hey, we can do comedy around horror. Now I guess that this is what Young Frankenstein wrought, really, on the world around that period.
Right. It did it in a very, I think what's interesting is this picture was very much a function of its time and played off of pop culture of the time. Really, Young Frankenstein went with a very classic, timeless theme, right? Was simply concentrated on the thematic elements of the universal picture, of the universal monsters and all that stuff, as opposed to, trying to speak to, the audience of that day. And though it did so, I think, very successfully. I don't know what it made, but I think it probably did okay.
It did well. It was Love at First Bite was a big hit. It really was. I think it made like $43 million, and it cost $3 million. So it was hugely successful.
In $79, that's really good. But I think that if this debuted before Dracula with Langella, that's when I think things began to take a much more serious romantic sort of turn, because Langella was not doing comedy. That was actually, I think the whole thing got a lift.
Yeah.
And it may have needed a spacer, in retrospect. It may have needed, because, we had Lugosi, we had all that, when not everybody kind of remembered too much of that. And there was more like Dracula in pop culture. Halloween every year. There was the Count from Sesame Street, which you mentioned earlier, Julia. And, there was more like just the knowledge of Dracula in general, just Count Dracula. And I think there was even, and then there was more of the British take of, with the Christopher Lee, the Hammer Dracula stuff, and that was more in the modern mind of the 60s and the 70s. You know, Satanic Life of Dracula. You know, these sorts of things that came out. This is what we thought of Dracula, and occasionally in the odd night gallery that would have a Dracula-esque sort of thing. But it almost like it needed a parody. It needed a comedy. It just needed a send-up of the genre and of Dracula itself, sort of as a palate cleanser. And then we kind of were ready for this sort of very serious uplift of Badham's Dracula, which I thought was terrific. But I mean, Dracula.
Well, you were on that discussion of Badham's Dracula a few weeks ago or months ago, whatever it was, right? Where we talked about that. It is. It's just gorgeous. And by the way, if people can get their hands on the old video or Laserdisc version, it's way better than the new DVD coloring. Because I don't know, are you aware of this, Adam? That they removed all the reds and yellows from the Badham Dracula? Where
how's it even possible? There's a whole sequence where they're having sex in red laser light.
Yeah, I mean, it's just washed it out. So Badham did it himself. It's not like he was the victim of some meddler. If you look at the original one, you know, there's all of this like crazy yellow everywhere. And in the new version, he recolor timed it so it's very gray and white. And then in that one, yes, you've still got the big yellow lights, but it's still muted. He gave the whole thing, this whole Saving Private Ryan gray, green, blue palette that I don't know what the hell he was thinking. But, you know, hey, you know, it's his Dracula. It's okay, you know. But I really prefer the old one. But I was just going to say, there's something interesting here, though. So I agree with everything you said. There's one really weird footnote that I would add, which is that this movie uses the reincarnation plot, which I wasn't aware of.
I was bring that up. I'm glad you said that, but it does it in a way which is not. And how does that connect to Matheson, which is interesting?
It has to connect to Matheson because Matheson invents it for Dan Curtis's Dracula, and it gets lifted again in '92, right, with Coppola, and it gets lifted by every cartoon. That's the most interesting thing is that Richard Matheson, unless somebody can bring me something before Richard Matheson, it seems to me that Richard Matheson sort of accidentally invented this trope that becomes just permanently ingrained in people's memory of how the Dracula story works. It's just the most. And it sort of makes sense. I guess that's why it works so well, is because, I don't know, why does Dracula come and go after Mina? And maybe he thinks she's a reincarnation of his lost love. That's so perfect and so easy that it just becomes ingrained. And
I think there's probably a lot of inside jokes there when there's that whole review, because Artie Johnson does this review of all of Dracula's loves, because he's like, you know, this is my first real love, and then he's like, well, what about? And I'm sure all you Dracula scholars probably recognize all the names that he throws out, but he says, no, that was just sex. This is love. Oh no, this is her reincarnated. This is her reincarnated. So it's not just Mina, but there was three other women he mentions. It's Mina and then two others. One of which is an earlier reincarnation.
I've never heard so many reincarnations before. That may be the first time I've heard that. It's like, oh, this one, and then this one, and then this one. It's like,
right.
Wow.
Yeah, that was new to me. I'd never heard that business before. It's fun.
Right.
It doesn't offend me at all. I think it's perfectly fine.
They also just touch on it, which is they just use it, you know, and it's okay. And they don't really make it a central point. He loves her because he sort of loves her, and he's got the magazine. It's not like they don't know each other. It's not like he's never seen her. It's not like he sees her for the first time when he meets her and his breath is taken away, you know, something like that. It's something that he's been watching her for a while, and they kind of touch on it, so it's sort of okay. You know, it's not bad. that trope kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes, depending on what the picture is, but it's okay.
Well, because you sure as heck don't need it. I mean, there's no reason at all to have the reincarnation bit in this movie, because, you know, he likes her because he's seen her and he's entranced by her from the magazines. So you're right, it's just there because it's apparently they figured
but he wouldn't
something
travel
like
all the way to
wolves,
New York. He wouldn't travel all the way to New York if he just thought she was pretty.
I guess
he gets kind of attacked by the communists, so, you know.
Yeah, he's been kicked out by the Communist Party.
Yeah, but I mean, picking New York for a pretty girl in a magazine, that's silly. I think they had to give it a deeper purpose or mission.
I don't disagree. I mean, again, I think it's fine for this. Sometimes they use it, and I'm like, oh really?
Well, like I said, these are sort of, they're like plug and play bits of comedy. You know, these are just stuff that you know, people have to include in some movies, and so yeah, some of this, that's just kind of rote. But what I'm talking about is the fact that, so given that it's just kind of rote, it's this Dracula thing that these people making a Dracula movie feel like they have to put in. It is so funny to me to think that it was only invented by Richard Matheson 6 years before this movie came out. It's new. You know, it's just this, but it's already instantly people are like, oh yeah, that's another thing. That's what I know. I know that bit about Dracula. So that's kind of cool. You know, that's just one of the neat things about you know, Richard Matheson. And by the way, I don't think I've watched the Richard Matheson Dracula in a number of years. I'm sure it's as boring as heck. I mean, you know, I've no doubt that it'll be a tough slog to get through, but you know, there we go. I do remember liking Jack Palance in that part. We should probably, because I know we've been going for about an hour, we should probably give our final thoughts, and we'll come around for our endorsements. Boy, what a fun movie to discuss. All right, let's go. Same thing. Adam, Julia, and Jason. Anything you think we might have missed, called out, things people should look for, whatever you want to lay on us. But final thoughts. Love at first bite.
I think what's interesting about maybe Love at First Bite is at the end, we didn't quite cover it, but in the end he gets the girl.
Yeah.
He gets the girl, and the psychiatrist gets paid, which is interesting. But you know, but I mean, it's one of the first times that really he doesn't, Dracula doesn't really quite get the girl at the end of Langella. Not in the, I mean, he may later, as far as we know, but I mean, he doesn't. He fails. And in most of these pictures, he fails, but in this one, he gets the girl. And it's okay, and everyone feels kind of like it's fine. And again, in terms of Dracula, I think that it plays an important role in defining the modern 70s take on mythology. And I think it can exist there and be perfectly great, and it actually is a window to probably into the 70s at the time. Much the way that Airplane, I think, was. It had some of that same stuff in it from 70s and 80s, kind of trailing in. So I think it's an important movie. I from that perspective, but and it is funny. It is funny in places, and it is well put together. And I did. If you haven't seen other Sandra Gotti pictures like Mr. Mom, in the early 70s and the early 80s. And actually one of my favorites, which is Man with a Good Shoe, he makes good pictures. And so, I think that this was a real, like one of the first big studio efforts to do something with Dracula in a long time, to reintroduce it to an audience. So I think it's important for that reason. But I think it may be a hard one to swallow for people who have never seen it before, who aren't kind of familiar with us in the 70s. So take it with a grain of salt.
Very, very good. And thanks for bringing up the ending. Actually, I can't believe we talked about this for an hour and we hadn't actually got to the ending. Which you're right. It's so remarkable that Dracula is so much the hero of this picture that it's totally fine that he gets the girl in the end, and it's even okay with Richard Benjamin.
Well, and it's even okay with her. I mean, she wasn't. It's not like she was tortured, like how in a lot of the movies it's like they clearly are fighting this conversion, and then they're just like, okay, fine, I give in because I've been seduced. In this case, she's like, no, this works for me. I like the eternal, youth thing. I'm okay with the nightlife thing because I actually don't start my day till 7 usually anyway.
Right.
So she's like, it's all good, it's fine. So she has there's no conflict, there's no internal turmoil or whatever for her. For me, I think though my favorite thing is actually probably the doctor, the psychiatrist, Dr. Jeffrey Rosenberg is his name until he reveals that he's the grandson of Van Helsing or whatever.
Yes.
Because he's such an interesting take on the Van Helsing rivalry or whatever. Just the kinds of things that he says, and the fact that he's crazy. I mean, he's crazy in his relationship with her.
Yes.
And he's just kind of obsessive and weird. And he's obsessed, and which I think is the case for all the Van Helsings. But in this case, he actually gets locked away and put in a straitjacket. At one point, that's the funniest thing in the film is his character and his interactions with both Dracula and with Cindy is her name.
He's very good.
So I like him a lot. At the end, he gets paid, and then he's like, he says, look, a check. She paid me everything she owes me. She left me, but she learned something. She's a responsible person or whatever. That's really funny.
That's a really good line. That's a really, and that one is very Richard Benjamin, whatever. It's wonderful.
So that was my favorite part of it.
I would mention that there's so much here for a Dracula fan to like. Now, close inspection, it certainly doesn't. I would not give this any more close inspection than you might imagine that a big Hollywood send-up of Dracula would be worth. There's just like in Lost Boys, when they want to show off that that the Frog Brothers and that Corey Haim are knowledgeable about comic books, they throw a bunch of dates back and forth. And the point of the scene is not to impress us is not to impress comic book fans with what they know about comic books. It's just to impress one another and we, the audience, who don't know anything about comic books, that they know a lot. It's the same thing here. The dates that they give about Dracula are meaningless. The dates they give about the Mina Harker thing, none of that makes any sense. It has nothing to do with any, he says he knew Mina in 1931. That doesn't match up at all with any, other than that was the year that the Dracula movie was made. But it doesn't, none of that means anything. They talk about him being around in 1356, and to my knowledge, Dracula was born in the 15th century. But it doesn't matter. This is a really good, this is about as good a Dracula comedy as it is possible to get. And the beginning is just a wonderful look at universal horror, but I think most of all what I like here is that it is such an amber-trapped look at pop culture in the late 70s. It is so cool. Just like Adam was saying, there's so much shtick here that you just haven't seen in a long time, and so I don't know why it's not available. I mean, if anybody is this not the reason this is not possible to get a hold of? What's the deal? Is it because is the racial humor just too offensive for it to be put on DVD today? That's just
no. I think it. I'm trying to remember who released it. Do you remember? Do you know what studio did it? What does it say? Who the studio was? Because it really means it's in somebody's library.
Sony owns it.
Okay, it just hasn't. You can get it on Amazon for $40, I think.
Exactly, it's out of print. It has been released on DVD recently.
Yeah.
It's not as though it's in the public domain or nobody owns it. It's I guess it's just that it's so forgotten that there's not enough demand to issue a DVD with this movie on it right now. But it does stand up. If you can get your hands on it, it's a funny picture, and I think it may well be the best comedy vampire movie I can think of. It's certainly funnier than Transylvania 65,000, which, Adam, as I promised, we've got to look
when that picture slows down a lot for the gags.
Yeah.
But that's such a weird guilty pleasure movie for me. This is a good picture in a lot of ways, but it's not a guilty pleasure. Transylvania 65,000, total guilty pleasure.
Interesting.
That's just one of those things where you go. And by the way, Julia, that picture is on rotation.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, and Julia would rotate as well. If we had that movie, and I guess we do have it on Netflix. That's a Jeff Goldblum picture. So
I love get Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah, you'll love it.
He's one of my movie boyfriends.
Sexy young Jeff Goldblum and sexy young Gina Davis.
What's so funny is this is also where Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum got married, and Ed Begley Jr., who's also in the picture. You know, there's a lot of this. Let's get together and make this picture, and hey, these guys are getting married, and all this weird.
Have you seen? What is it, Jason? Is it no, not Philadelphia.
Are you talking about the one where Jeff Goldblum plays Jeff Goldblum, the star as Harold Hill in a revival of The Music Man, so that he can get his
right. But what's it called? It's name. It's the city. It's a city name. It's not Philadelphia. It's
Oh God, I can't remember. That's so funny that you would think of that. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, that has Ed Begley in it as well.
I know this movie you're talking about, where they went and shot stuff. Yeah, I remember this. Now,
he wants to get his girlfriend a visa, and so the only way he can do that is by getting her a job in a play, but he has to take the lead for them to hire her. And yeah,
I've seen this. Is it or seen a piece of it somewhere? But did you guys ever see the thin man, the tall guy, the tall man?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. The tall man.
Where he's doing a revival of the Elephant Man.
Yes.
Yeah, it was called Elephant with an exclamation point. Yes.
It's a very strange thing, Jeff Goldblum. You know, when you've got you have him in Big Chill and you have him in other things like that, and then you have him in Into the Night, which is a very peculiar picture.
Okay. By the way, the movie we were just talking about is Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. Thank you.
And before we veer too far off, yes. Into the Night is one of my all-time favorite films. I love Into the Night. I wish that everybody knew that movie. Yeah.
Not After Hours weird, but it's weird.
I don't know how I couldn't come up with Pittsburgh. I'm like, Philadelphia. No, that's not it. That would be the other big city.
Less expression in this one.
Yes, but boy, Into the Night. Oh God, what a gorgeous movie. That's one that I could just let play all the time and sort of enjoy looking at. Beautiful. It's John Landis. John Landis at his best. Well, that's a lot to say. Okay, because we'll probably end up doing American Werewolf in London. Anyway, Twilight Zone. All right, so those are my final thoughts, whatever they were. Watch Jeff Goldblum in Transylvania 65000, I think. I'm not really sure what there was. But Love at First Bite was lovely. If you watch it on DVD, stop the movie when they start disco dancing and just go to YouTube and watch the original version.
Yeah. That's
what we did. And let's go to endorsements. Adam, do you have anything for us this week?
Yeah, actually, over the weekend, I took a break from this bunch of stuff and, had seen, was trying to weigh whether I was going to see Man of Steel. I had seen Lone Ranger, and I was kind of like, what am I going to see? And so my wife and I went to go see World War Z.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know whether you've seen it.
I have, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know how you felt about it.
I have not because I thought the previews looked so stupid. Every time I saw the previews, I was like, this movie looks so dumb. So I made Jason go see it by himself.
I have to tell you, I liked it. There were moments that I didn't quite predict, and I was at the edge of my seat a few times. I think it was actually, good filmmaking, and there was some good bits there. Knowing that this was a problematic picture to make because of the source material and because of script problems early on, and it was sort of a big effort by Brad Pitt to sort of get behind it and make this thing. I have to say, I liked it. I think it ended in a way that was pretty good actually, and it was not. I think there was a lot of turmoil around it, but I have to say I like it. I would endorse that picture. That was worth seeing.
I agree. By the way, I did see it, and the thing. Were you struck by the fact that it's bloodless? It has literally. It's very tense. There's a lot of really, really great bits of suspense, but there is no gore at all.
There's no gore, which is amazing.
Yeah. So many people die, but I mean, think of like Dawn of the Dead, where people are just like chomping one another's calves and stuff like that, and all kinds of craziness. This is not like that at all. This is the most bloodless zombie movie I've ever seen, but it's good. I agree. I liked it a lot. Julia, did you have anything to endorse?
I think I've already endorsed Breaking Bad, so I'm going to go a completely different direction. I'm inspired by Adam saying that his horror movie rotation is a Sunday morning rotation. I've decided to endorse
Bunheads.
Super Soul Sunday on the Oprah Network. the Oprah Winfrey Network. She runs every Sunday morning. She starts out with Super Soul Sunday, and it's like a different inspirational, motivational person that she talks to. And actually, if you're feeling, with all these horror movies that we watch, dark and then depressed, it's really uplifting to watch this on Sunday morning if you decide you want to shift away from your Sunday morning horror movies, Adam.
I just no. It just makes me want to stab myself in the head with a fork. That's not quite true.
No.
It's all actually, Joy. I have complete respect. It's all lovely.
Too late. After to stab myself in the eye with the fork line, you can't take it back.
All right. My endorsement, actually, two things. I'm reading a novel by Ann Edwards, who wrote The Haunted Summer, which is the book about Byron and Shelley, and sort of brought the whole concept of that menage into the pop culture, because that became a movie. It became two movies, really, an official adaptation, which was Haunted Summer, starring Eric Stoltz, and it also became Gothic with Gabriel Byrne. But she wrote this other ghost story called The Survivors, which I'm reading now, and I'm really enjoying. But the other thing is that I got my hands on these magazines that have been reprinted by Marvel called the Tomb of Dracula. So everybody knows that there was this long-running Dracula comic that ran from 72 to 80 or something like that. And it was, just a long-running monthly comic about Dracula called the Tomb of Dracula. Well, in 1979, they started a full, big black and white short story, anthology magazine called Tomb of Dracula, which was illustrated, but it was for mature audiences, so they could have more violence and adult situations and stuff, and articles and everything. And I picked up just recently, out of my own collection, but I hadn't looked at it in years, the number one issue, 1979, and it includes big articles about Dracula, the Langella one, and also Love at First Bite. And it's really cool, to look at these and see the, original Gene Colan art, and also all this Dracula work, and just see it sort of trapped in amber. So if you are a Dracula fan, I recommend, going on eBay and getting, all 6 issues, because it only ran for 6 issues, all 6 issues of the Tomb of Dracula magazine, or you can get it in, let's see, all of these are reprinted in the Essential Tomb of Dracula, which is one of the big black and white collections that Marvel does, so you can also do it that way. Tomb of Dracula magazine, just really, really cool, and just a neat look at where Draculology, for want of a better word, was in 1960.
I like that word.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, everybody, thank you very much. Thank you for being on, Adam, Julia. Thank you very much. And if you're listening, like us on Facebook, review us on iTunes, tell your friends, leave us suggestions on what we should review. We've got a few more in the horror comedy retrospective, and then I'm not sure what's next. I think we're going back to Stephen King. So thanks a lot, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.